It was in the late 1980s when allegations of a child prostitution ring in Omaha, Nebraska first surfaced. This ring wasn't your local, run-of-the-mill prostitution ring, according to sources, but instead a sophisticated one involving prominent and high-level individuals. According to the story, the ring's pimps were powerful brokers who catered to individuals from the higher rung of the government. The two men central to running the said scheme were Larry King and Craig Spence. Both also ran the Franklin Federal Credit Union. Founded in 1968, the Franklin Federal Credit Union's goal was to make credit available to businesses and individuals in the African American community of North Omaha. Lawrence E. King, better known as Larry King, not the CNN news anchor, served as the credit union's manager for over 18 years. King was described as a flamboyant person, known for owning several businesses and living in one of the better neighborhoods in town. He's described as being tall and dresses lavishly. He is also seen traveling in his chartered jet, oftentimes with an entourage of young men. He later became a prominent Republican. In April of 1988, officials from the National Credit Union arrived on the doorstep of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union and closed it down. They were acting on a tip from the FBI and IRS. Then, on November 14th, the agency, which oversees the nation's chartered credit unions and handles insurance for the deposits, filed a suit against Larry King. They found out the Franklin Credit Union assets only totaled $2.5 million, making upwards of $38 million missing. At first, it was allegations of embezzlement that first lured the eyes of the public and the government towards the credit union, but it wasn't long before reports of possible child sex abuse surfaced. Then a speaker on the executive board of the state legislature in Lincoln, State Senator Ernie Chambers, said he had received countless reports giving credence to child sexual and physical abuse linked to the credit union scandal. Later on, the FBI acknowledged they also received such reports and investigated the matter independent to the embezzlement and fraud inquiry. Although little information was released about the nature of the allegations, the accusation said boys and girls, often taken from foster homes, were transported around the country, particularly in Washington, D.C., to serve as high-ranking officials by airplane to offer sexual favors in exchange for a reward. Aside from Larry King, the other main suspect arrested was Craig Spence. Spence was a Republican lobbyist and was also part of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union. Later on, he openly expressed his fear he would be killed by the CIA and his death made to look like a suicide. True enough, Spence was found dead inside his hotel room, and the coroner declared his death a suicide. Many of his partners would later be sent to jail for being involved in an adult sex ring. Allegations of child abuse, drugs, and pornography were first reported as far back as 1985. Among the first reports were from a social worker handling a case against Jarrett and Barbara Webb. Jarrett Webb was a board member at the Franklin Federal Credit Union. The allegations also brought forth a connection between King, the Federal Credit Union, and Boys Town, a nonprofit organization dedicated to caring for children and families. Founded by Edward Flanagan, Boys Town was created in 1917 and was one of the first orphanages for boys in Omaha. Boys Town went on to become a modern example of a public boys' home all over the world. What made the Franklin cover-up case so compelling and downright shocking is that big names were said to be involved. This included not just figures connected with the Franklin Credit Union, but also prominent individuals like a Nebraska court judge, the chief of police in Omaha, and many, many more. In fact, the allegation of involvement also extended to former President George Bush Sr., Dick Cheney, Barney Frank, and many others. The curious thing about all these allegations is that after a 2-year investigation into the matter, along with several witnesses and victims coming forward, the court ruled everything about the case as a carefully crafted hoax. This is despite the fact people have pointed to an abundance of evidence against the fact. At least two plaintiffs, Alicia Owen and Paul Bonacci, willingly served time in prison because they refused to recant their testimonies. Paul was later awarded $1 million by the civil court after a judge believed his allegations of abuse. Meanwhile, two others supposedly withdrew their allegations because of pressure from the FBI. There was also another victim who never recanted her testimony, but luckily didn't serve any time in jail. The story of a cover-up soon rippled across. In fact, now hardly anyone in the mainstream are even aware of the Franklin Credit Union story and the prostitution ring tied to it. It wasn't until former Republican Senator John DeCamp investigated the matter in depth and uncovered the claims were legitimate. DeCamp was among those involved in creating a documentary called Conspiracy of Silence, which was supposed to air on the Discovery Channel in May of 1994. The documentary centered on exposing a network of religious leaders and prominent Washington politicians who took children and flew them to D.C. for sex orgies. But at the last minute, when it was supposed to air, pressure from Washington politicians threatened the TV cable industry, and they pulled the plug. Soon after, the rights were bought by unknown people who ordered all copies of the documentary to be destroyed. Luckily, there are existing copies of it online. Even though the quality isn't good, it does showcase crucial information the public needs to know.